Senator Manchin, it's a pleasure, and we thank you very much for graciously giving us some of your time. Let me give you a quick introduction, and we'll start with your opening remarks.
Sure.
Anyway, we tend to divide people into those older and younger than us, and Senator Manchin is a youngster. He's 6 months younger than me. But in any case, he's the ranking member of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. He's been in the Senate from 2010 to the present time, and before that he was the governor of West Virginia. I at least remember once sharing a stage with him at RPE conference, and so he's some of the people while I was in DC worked with. He doesn't really need an introduction. It's arguably the most influential senator in the Senate today. And before I let him speak, I just want to say one thing. For those of you who heard my remarks, I talked about the countries that have policy and law aspirations, things like that. There was something new that happened very, very recently in July, signed into law July 16, 2022, called the Inflation Reduction Act. In that law, it was the biggest clean energy legislation the United States has ever had, and it contains many, many things, and I hope, Senator, you will talk about some of those things. So the floor is yours.
Sure.
Okay, thank you again for coming here.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So, Dr. Chu, if I may refer to you as my friend Steve, let me first say it's an honor to join you for this year's Global Energy Forum. I wish I was there in person with you also, but unfortunately I was unable. But I do thank you for inviting me to be part of this important discussion. We have passed some historic legislation over the last year and a half that's going to secure our energy security and independence while combating climate change. It's a twofold purpose, to be energy secured and be able to also help our climate and Mother Earth, if you will. It is a false narrative that we have to choose between combating global climate change, affordability, or American energy security. The United States of America is a superpower with abundant natural resources and the hardest workers in the world. So I believe that we should be leading the world through innovation, not elimination. And that's what the Inflation Reduction Act does. And the bipartisan infrastructure bill last year focused on also. These laws take historic steps to invest in technologies and methods to produce all types of energy in the cleanest way possible, while also growing our domestic energy manufacturing base, especially in areas like my state that feel like they've been left behind, which is coal country. We did that by making smart investments in energy tax credits for things like nuclear, hydrogen, CCUS, that built on the tens of billions in the bipartisan bill last year. So, Steve, we provide strong incentives to onshore manufacturing through new tax credits and refining our vehicle tax credits to make sure they're being used to buy American assembled cars with minerals from North America or our favored nations. Subsidizing China's continuous domination of the critical mineral supply chain, and to one day weaponize it against us as Putin has done in Ukraine with energy. Makes no sense at all. The IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, also sends a very clear signal that there has never been a better time to invest in cleaner American energy, and also including oil and gas production with lower methane emissions. These bills also provide significant incentives to assist families and businesses to invest in their own energy efficiency, which is going to help stabilize the grid, and it's going to reduce the cost and emissions. All in all, these historic pieces of legislation are going to help save Americans money on electric bills. That's why we call it the Inflation Reduction Act. It's going to increase domestic energy production, which will put more product in the market that'll lower our energy prices and allow us to help our allies, all while reducing emissions. So there is so much to help our country and these laws as they are, but I know we'll realize the benefits faster if we're able to reform our energy permitting process so that we can get products to market, meet the challenges much quicker. And I'm working very hard to do this in a responsible way. That's going to accelerate timelines without bypassing our environmental laws. It can be done and it should be done, and we're going to keep at it until we get it done. With that, let me turn back to you, Dr. Chu, and I look forward to answering your questions and discussions, discussing the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act for the entire country.
Well, thank you very much. That was a great introduction to the IRA. Let's talk a little bit more. And from your perspective and your ranking member, not ranking member, you're the chair, you know, energy and where we get from energy, how we go from where we are today to where we want to be by 2030, 2040, 2050. Just to remind the audience, the analysis of the IRA, which you were very instrumental in designing and getting through, is going to be reducing carbon emissions in the United States from 2005 by about 40%. It's a substantial piece of legislation because it is legislation. And that's the most important thing. But tell me more about how you see these things, the permitting process. Let me give you one story, and then you can go on from there.
Sure.
When I was Secretary of Energy, it was about 11 years from the time people wanted to put an electrical transmission line in to when they can actually turn on the electricity. And so we assembled a bunch of people and said, can this be reduced to 3 or 4 years? Again, as you said, listening to the environmental concerns, giving it fair time and hearing and considerations, but 11 years was just too long, and then many people just didn't want to do this. Now we have a lot of money authorized in this bill, and how do you want to see this? In the end of the meeting, Secretary Salazar of Interior, Ken Salazar, said, well, look, someone's got to take responsibility for this. So I raised my hand and said, I'll take it. He called me up an hour after the meeting and said, Steve, I was wrong. I can't support this. We don't want you to be in charge of this. Why, Ken? Because the people in Interior, Fish and Wildlife Game, don't want you to take charge, but you may make it happen. They did not want power lines where they hunt and fish.
I'd have been.
And so that's a softball. Tell me more about the permitting challenges across the United States.
Let me give you, if I may, give the audience a little bit of a background on how we got to the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. You know, you remember the Build Back Better was there. It was a very large piece of legislation encompassing more than just energy. Okay, it was encompassing so many things in our social environment, if you will, and just the inflation and basically the amount of money we put in the market. So everything kind of went dormant from December of 2021 up to July of this year. What had happened is the Ukraine war. And Ukraine war, Putin has weaponized energy, fossil, if you will, and put a hurting on Europe. And things were getting much worse, not better. Nobody thought that war would continue or last any time at all. They told it would be over in a week or two. Not a shot was fired in Crimea. So what made anyone think that big bad Russia would not do the same thing with all of Ukraine as they did with part of it? So that was the first. So when that happened, and then we saw our administration was, you know, and a lot of my friends were looking at turning towards Venezuela and taking sanctions off of Venezuela or Iran or dealing with the Saudis to ask them to produce more for the market to keep the prices down. And I got really upset about that because I knew we had the ability to do 13 or more million barrels a day. We've been there before historically. We're down to about 10 and a half. A lot of that was due towards COVID. The demand wasn't there, but then we weren't ramping back up quick enough. So I said, we've got to do something. So about April, after things were dormant, I talked to Schumer and I said, we have a problem with energy. And I said, we can walk and chew gum. We can do both. And we do it better and cleaner. I said, so my definition of decarbonizing is a combination of using more of the fossil that we produce in America, cleaner than anywhere in the world, replacing the dirtier fossil around the world, and investing in the new clean technology for the future. That's what I thought we could do. He says, well, why don't we write the bill? So my staff and I started writing the bill. And a two-way path, Steve, what we did, we went down both. We went down securing fossil, energy security, with the horsepower that fossil gives today, with the investment for the horsepower we need for the future. And that's the $360 billion that we put into that. So we thought it was a balanced approach to an energy policy in America. But I knew that all of that would be for naught if we could not get into where, let's say, our neighbors in Canada, Australia, other producing developed nations that have environmental laws and responsibilities, but they do it quicker. They're able to get a transmission line or a pipeline that's, once it's defined as needed and the market is there to sustain it, they're able to get it into production within 1 to 3 years. We're anywhere from a minimum of 5 to 10 years and longer. And by that time, we've done wore out everybody through the court system. And on top of that, we've added so much to the cost, which is passed on to the consumer. None of this makes any sense to me at all. But the way the vehicle we had in the legislature was reconciliation, Steve. And reconciliation is all I had in front of me. The bill we put together, the IRA, had an awful lot of bipartisan input over the years. But when I had the one vehicle, I knew I would not get any Republican votes. So that made it a partisan bill. And that basically automatically drove a wedge in the whole thing. So that's where we got to. And then what happened is, because of the guardrails that are put on I'm getting into the weeds, I know it. But the way the legislature, what you're able to do in reconciliation, it has to be with financial matters, cannot be with policy. And basically, permitting is all policy. And it would not fit in reconciliation. So I've tried to put it in the continuing resolution, and I'm working now trying to get it in the National Defense Authorization. We need to get that done to realize the timetables we're trying to meet, the 2030, the 40% reductions, and also be able to have security that we need today for the next 10 years and help our allies who are in dire need. That's how we got to where we are. And I think we can still accomplish all of this. We've accomplished so much just with the bills. Bipartisan infrastructure, Inflation Reduction Act. And now we can do and fulfill our task by getting our permitting bill done.
So that's great. For those of you who don't know the subtleties of this, if you have a standard bill that has to go through the Senate, we still have a tradition in the Senate that you can have a veto and you need a supermajority, 60 votes.
There we go.
And there's no way you can get 60 votes. To get 50 votes, then it has to have something having to do with budget and reconciliation. So it has very strong guardrails about this, and that's what the senator was talking about. But this reconciliation bill, as I said before, is nearly 380 million for production tax credits for wind, for clean hydrogen investment tax credits, for solar, for all the things that, as the senator said, have to be part of the future. Meanwhile, where we're in the present, we still do need fossil fuel. And the Russian invasion made that very clear as Europe is trying to figure out how to survive the first winter and the second winter. But Senator, looking ahead, and so we know where we need to go and how to get there in the best possible way that makes the most sense for America, the world, for the economy, but where it is a very, very important thing that the climate change is very real, and there's really essentially no debate about that. And so in seeing, in your experiences, how do you see, as you talk around the United States, for what is your feeling for how we can get America moving forward? Because we have to somehow meet in the middle, some way, somehow, in order to get this done. How can you see where we can go in that respect?
Well, you just heard me talking about, I don't think that we're going to meet our goals if we believe that we can eliminate oil or gas or even coal and all the things that we're relying on today for the energy mix that we have that makes up the majority of our energy mix. We have to do that much better and cleaner to set a standard for the world, because they're using these products and not using them in the cleanest fashion. But next of all, we have to show how we can transition into hydrogen. We're using 45Q, which is carbon capture, utilization, sequestration. We're giving incentives for that, and moving things that we know that are doable. We know that we can do geothermal. We know that nuclear is a must. You have to have nuclear in the mix. You will not meet your emissions your goals that you're shooting for. So all these things we put in there, but Steve, we put so much in production tax credit, investment tax credit, in wind and solar and storage. Storage is a big thing. We know that we've been able to develop wind and solar and bring the price down from 16 to 18 cents per kilowatt hour down in the 3, 4, 5, and 6 cent range. But we still only have four hours. We need more hours of storage, and more of that is going to be invested in this. Greenhouse gas emissions, that's all nuclear, geothermal, hydro, that all qualifies for the new energy tax credits. We have done so many things. There's so much interest in the United States of America today. And where do you put your energy investment? Where do you go? There's only one place that does what we did. So we're attracting them here. Also, what we've done, Steve, is we're divesting an awful lot. You'll see the major energy companies in America, the Exxon Mobils, the Shell, and all of them are divesting now. They're having a divest portfolio of clean with traditional fossil, but also they're everything we did with natural gas, methane emissions. We have a methane fee, but we have incentives. We have help to get some of our smaller producers. Our larger producers have already had the technology. We know the technology is there, and there's a value in methane. We need our environmental community to basically partner with us to allow us to build the pipelines to take the methane off. And everyone concerns about flaring and vetting. Well, the reason for that, you can't get a permit to put a pipeline in to take it to market. And if you're going to produce for the product that we need, the natural gas, that's a byproduct of it. And that has value too. So a lot of the things that we're trying to do makes common sense to use everything. Now, I come from a rural area, and I heard my grandmother always talk about when they used to butcher the hogs when they were young. And I said, Mama Kay, is that a tough situation? How'd you do that? She says, honey, we ate everything but the squeal.
Yeah, sold the pig.
So she didn't waste anything, Steve. It's not a pretty picture, but they didn't waste anything. And that's what we're saying. We shouldn't be wasting anything in our energy. Any way, shape, or form. We use everything we have.
Well, you'll be pleased to know, I was watching industry, and how would industry react to the Inflation Reduction Act? And it is actually beginning to spur real investments. For example, I talked to a representative for Air Liquide, which handles one of the major handlers of gases in the world. And they said because of this bill, they were going to be investing hundreds of millions of dollars in a hydrogen production facility. Okay? And if it wasn't for, if it wasn't for that, and so that bill is actually stimulating industry to make these long investments. So then I went push back and said, well, that's great, but are you in it for the long haul? Once these investment tax credits go away, he said, we're definitely in it for the long haul, but we needed this to get us off because all the other people on the investment finance side were saying, you don't want to take this gamble. And so I've seen this in my
exactly
discussions
correct.
with Royal Dutch Shell, now Shell, based in Great Britain and Netherlands, they're saying, yes, we're going to make huge hundreds of millions of dollars investments. So that part seems to be working already in this last few months. You have any comments about that?
Well, I do. I've seen the same thing that you did. And before we put that credit in, hydrogen is something, the WTO, the World Trading Order, for over the last 2 decades or more, basically has, trying to look and help the different parts of the world that are developing. We wanted to do all of that. But we left ourselves vulnerable. And then we found out the supply chain with COVID, how vulnerable we may be, and our citizens in our country that'll pay that price. So I said, we should never get ourselves in that position again. We definitely want to be the leader of the world, want to be the superpower of the world, and help every developing nation, every freedom-loving nation that there is in the world. We want to make sure we're there to assist them. And that's where we get our favored nation treaty. But on this, I said, we can make hydrogen all day long. We have the ability to be totally self-sufficient, but we have to have the incentive. We spent about $100 billion when you all, in your administration, basically when you with President Obama, for wind and solar. You took wind and solar from the concept and you matured it, but you spent $100 billion doing it with investment and production tax credits, okay? We didn't do anything for hydrogen during that period of time. That's where all of our effort was put. We're doing the same thing now for hydrogen to mature it. And we gave $3 a kilogram, which is basically, it breaks down to $1, I think it's $1.26 a pound, $1.36 per pound of hydrogen. That's the credit they get for every pound they produce, $1.36. That's the game changer. That is the game changer. We take a lot of the risk, and we have direct pay for the first 5 years because we know that you're not going to be income producing starting out in a brand new technology that's never been matured. So we have to have cash flow. Well, we're going to basically have that direct pay for 5 years. Trust me, no one in the world is doing what we're doing. And this is why they're all coming, because of that. And we looked at everything that we possibly could. I'm not a big fan of direct pay, but there's certain things you need to mature a market and to accelerate that, and this is what we did.
It's actually remarkable. The United States went, when I joined the Obama administration, we had plenty of hopes. None of it, not none of it, some of it was definitely realized. But to see this bill that's been enacted, and I see that it's really going to be gaining momentum, and suddenly we went from a laggard nation, if I look at what Europe is doing, what other countries in Asia are doing, to where I think there's going to be real leadership. I'm on the board of a carbon capture company, and I do research on carbon capture, and I'm finding out that we're now getting investments in carbon capture, real investments for the first time. And so any thoughts on things like that was also written into the bill?
Well, what we did, we accelerated that, Stephen. We went from, before it was $35. It was 30, can you hear me?
Yes, $35. Yeah, the 45Q you're talking about?
Okay, it was $35. 45Q was $35, and that was captured, and if you used the carbon that you captured, it went from $35 to $60. That's a game changer, but guess what? We went from $50 to $85 if you sequester it. Let's say that you haven't captured and you had no use for it, but you sequestered it in the ground. Now that offsets your cost. Before at $50, at $60, at $50, it did not. You were going in the hole at 50. At $85, it's now doable. And that's why you're seeing investments in carbon capture. Carbon capture, we know we can do it. It has never matured because we didn't know what to do with it. And it was too costly. Give you a perfect example. The Mountaineer Electric Plant, coal-fired plant in West Virginia, was the first one to prove that you could commercialize. We could take clear stream carbon off, liquefy it and pressurize it, put it in the ground, 1,800 PSI. Well, it's a 900 megawatt. It took 300 megawatts of energy to do all that. So here you have a coal-fired utility plant that's producing 900 megawatts of energy for sale. Now you've amortized the debt over 900 megawatts. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to use a third of that to meet your environmental concerns, and you're only going to be able to have 600 megawatts of marketable power. You cannot bank that. You can't credit that, and you can't get investors for that, and no bank will do it, finance it. So it was a deal that we proved that we could do what needed to be done, but the optics are basically the numbers just didn't work, Steve. I don't know what else to tell you.
Well,
so
let me try to explain to the audience.
And that's when everybody found.
Yeah. Let me try to explain to the audience. The carbon capture is very nuanced. There are some people who say, no, carbon capture is bad, it's evil, because it allows fossil fuel to continue indefinitely. But many of those people have completely turned around, because if you look at where we're going based on our current policies, even with the Inflation Reduction Act, as I said before, we're heading towards 3 degrees. We don't want to be heading towards 3 degrees. So we need to eventually not only capture carbon from all the point sources, the steel, the plastic, the cement plants, power plants, everything, but we also need to capture carbon from the air. And so in order to do that, you've got to get this thing going, the technology going. And so there's a realization that carbon capture and sequestration will be an essential part of how we deal with the future. And so it's very important that we get this technology going. And so when I see this investment tax credit, and Senator Manchin was right on, it's $60 a ton it costs. And if you're going to give people $45 a ton, it's a non-starter. $60 after the nth plant, which means it's within striking distance at $85 to say we will make the investment because this is where we're heading. So it's not an automatic giveaway, but it tells industry, here's where we're heading, make the investment and see that it works.
Hey, Steve, also, we have direct pay for 5 years on carbon capture, which we have never, ever even contemplated before. So what we're saying is we know that an awful lot has to be invested. And it's going to be a while till you get a return. Do you have any tax liabilities to take advantage of the tax credits?
Yeah.
So we'll have direct pay. And we're giving you cash flow up front for the first 5 years. That's the difference. And you know what? We'll help the whole world, because there's more fossil being used today around the world than ever before.
Yeah,
and
but
they're going to have to. And I say, they said, well, how are we going? We have no control over the sovereignty of these other nations to make them use it. You know, China's building more coal-fired plants than any place on earth. So even though they're doing other things too with clean technology and using, whether it be nuclear or solar or wind and whatever, they're building more coal-fired plants for dispatchable power than ever. The only thing I've said about other countries are still relying on fossil, and we know that we have developed technology that you could use fossil because you're going to use it anyway. But if you want into our market, be able to trade with the United States of America, you're going to have to use the technology that we perfected and commercialized. If not, you will not be. It'll be a penalty coming into our markets. That's the incentive that we can give the rest of the world.
Well, whatever it's worth, my company I'm on the board of, Svante, is partnering with Climeworks. Climeworks is all about air capture. And so it breathes new life into what we're trying to do.
We have credit for that, didn't we? We did that too, direct air capture. Absolutely. We believe in that also.
Yeah, and it's going to be absolutely necessary in the future, and you've got to get these technologies going. It still costs too much. It's not going to be practical. You got to get below $100 a ton, but I think it's possible. Joe, Senator, would you mind opening some questions? Okay,
sure.
That's great. So they're going to be, now the monitor is going to show some questions that have been screened, I hope. Maybe not.
Well, hey Steve, someone has to read them to me. I don't have it.
I'm gonna read them to you, but the AV guys are trying to work on it. And if there are any questions, maybe not. We'll give it 10 more seconds, and I'm going to go.
You must have a very matured crowd, audience.
No. How are we doing back there?
So submit by your mobile phone app?
Oh, submit by your mobile phone app.
Hey, Steve.
Yep.
Steve, can we talk about the EV just real quick while you're assembling that?
Okay, you guys, before we start, you guys have the mobile app? Yeah. Great. Submit by that. Okay. EVs.
Okay, let them get prepared for any questions they may have, but I want to talk about the electric vehicle tax credits. Let me tell you, in 2008, you all were in office, just getting in office, when the 2008 tax credit went in for EVs. That was $7,500. If you bought an electric vehicle in the United States of America, you could get $7,500 tax credit. There was very little guardrails put on that. Didn't care what your income was. You could be a multimillionaire, and we'd still give you $7,500. You could buy a car that was $200,000, and we'd still give you $7,500. But we maxed out that when any manufacturer got to 200,000 vehicles, that manufacturer couldn't offer that anymore. So Tesla was the first, as you know. And then basically General Motors and Ford, all three of them have hit their 200,000. This is under the old piece of legislation. If we had not done the Inflation Reduction Act, and the old law was still in place and no one repealed that, the only way you could get $7,500 is probably buying a foreign vehicle. And most of them would come from China that were electric vehicles. They'd flood the market. And we thought that was wrong, so we stopped that. So then the automobile industry still wanted $7,500. And I said, I have a hard time understanding why you would think that the federal government should still give $7,500 of taxpayers' money for the incentive to buy your product when people are waiting a year to get it now. I said, what little economics I understand is supply and demand. You have a demand for your product. Why do I have to give an extra incentive for that? So they said, oh no, we got to have it, just have to have it. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I said, I understand basically the supply chain that we depend on right now. For the first time in the history of the United States, we have never, ever, ever relied on a foreign supply chain that I've been able to find for our transportation mode, whether it was vehicles under Henry Ford and mass producing, whether it's trains or planes or any mode of transportation. We've been able to produce and be self-reliant in the United States of America. Now all of a sudden you want to transition, and by 2035, the majority of our vehicles will be electric vehicles. But we're going to be totally beholden upon a foreign supply chain for that, because China has about 80% of the processed critical minerals and anodes and cathodes and all that's being done. So we gave them $3,750 credit if the critical minerals were sourced in North America or by our favored nation treaty, okay? And then we gave the other $3,750 if it was manufactured and produced in North America. So you want your $7,500? You're going to help us develop and accelerate very rapidly a supply chain that we can basically have control over with our favored nations and ourselves and be produced in North America. For the North American taxpayers, for the United States of America taxpayers to be investing in. So that's how we came about what we have.
Yeah, in addition to that, you already mentioned it, but I just wanted to re-mention it because it went over very quickly. The Inflation Reduction Act also addressed critical materials. We're talking about lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earths, all the materials we need for clean energy, for EVs and everything else like that. China has been trying to get a lock on where they're produced and contracted and made. And so, again, in order not to be subject to this total control, this Inflation Reduction Act has said, the United States, we have to have different supply chains, which is another part of this. But let me turn to this questions, and there's a question that says, Is there a chance for a grand bargain to eliminate permitting regulation constraints in exchange for a price on carbon? And if so, what price?
Well, the price on carbon we have talked back and forth on, okay, and looking at different things. But during an inflationary time right now, to be honest with you, there's not an appetite for it right now because they know that it might be more inflationary than what we can handle during high inflation. I think there's going to be a time for it. I think there's going to be a carbon pricing, a worldwide carbon pricing. And I think that there'll be a time when the United States has to make a very, very aggressive decision of how they're going to handle this. There has been more of an appetite for border adjustment. The border adjustment based on the carbon productions that we're basically seeing that whether it be steel, different commodities and products coming to America that are high carbon produced, and that carbon would be adjusted at the border adjustment based on the things that we're doing and a much less more of a carbon atmosphere or an environment than what's coming at us at a much lower price. And there's been a lot of talk on that. Both Republicans and Democrats have been very much engaged in that. But then when COVID hit, and now with inflation, Steve, that has cooled off.
Well, let me encourage both sides of the aisle to consider that. I remember raising this in 2010, that if the EU, the United States, and China got serious, because you're not going to bring along 192 countries in any UN agreement, but if those three groups got really serious about it, but they said, but it's going to penalize our economies. So I said, that's okay, you make border adjustments. We have tariffs already. And I remember Gene Sperling, who is an economic advisor, he said, no, that's against the World Trade Organization. He said, no, Gene, it might take a few years, but think about it now, because that's the only way you're going to get a price on carbon and stabilize things. Those are the three.
Well, you're exactly.
So I encourage you to work with the left, the right, everybody, because I still think in the end that is going to be necessary. And then when these three big players come along.
You were a decade, again, Steve, you were a decade ahead of your time.
Anyway,
so tell me, what are the...
And let me just tell you this. If that's going to happen, that's how it'll happen with border adjustment. That's the only way I can see it happening in any time soon.
Yeah, otherwise you're not going to get legislation in a particular country to penalize people where industry moves away, jobs moves away, everything else moves away. You've got to compensate in that way. So that's the reality of the situation. But all it takes is the three big players. I think it can be done. We talked about innovation. What is most excites you about what's happening in the innovation scene and in getting from where we are today to where we need to be? What's the most exciting innovation?
And I've never seen. Okay, I'm in a state. West Virginia is probably one of the heaviest lifting states in the nation. Okay, we have mined the coal that's made the steel, that's built the ships and defended our country and built the factory. We've done it all. And now we have an ocean of gas under our feet, and we have liquids under, butane, propane, methane. We have all of that in our gas production now with the fracking in the Marcellus Shale, and now we have the Utica Shale. We have a couple shale plays, and it's just unbelievable. So with all that going on, I'm seeing hydrogen hubs. All the people want to put in a hydrogen hub. This is one of the places they believe that would be natural for a hydrogen hub. I'm seeing people with storage, battery storage, so many different people coming to my state and looking at different ways and bringing different concepts of maybe not using lithium, using different types of materials without being dependent upon lithium or cobalt or nickel. And then we have another energy company which is probably making an announcement very soon, either by the end of the day today in West Virginia, or no later than next week. They're going to put an iron storage, which basically is using these massive pieces of iron that's going to be through this process of rust and reversing that and the energy that's produced from that, and they can basically back up to 1,000 megawatts. It's unreal what I'm seeing happening. And the innovation, these are things that's been around for a long time. There's just never been an appetite, or there's never been an incentive like we have done with the Inflation Reduction Act that can bring some of these tech. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, Stephen. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to basically balance the wheel, make the car run a little smoother. But with that, we're looking at technology that's been around, but no one's ever invested or believed in it. Now it's time for us to bring it to fruition. So I'm seeing things that I've never believed in. I'm seeing that basically they want to take, I have an Australian company that wants to take a 1,300 megawatt coal-fired plant that's going to be shuttered in 2 years, and they want to turn that into a green hydrogen, producing green ammonia to be shipping electrons around the world. Now, I said, come on, explain this to me. They said, Joe, you're producing 1,300 megawatts there. The infrastructure is there to move 1,300 megawatts. If you can move it out, you can move it in. If you can move it in, we'll put the electrolyzers. We'll do it. We have all the water. You're right on the river. We have all the water that's needed for this. And then we'll make green ammonia and we'll ship it on the barges on the river. This has changed my state and our opportunity to diversify ourselves. It's exciting.
So we're out of time, but I want to give one final question. And we talked about the Inflation Reduction Act. It's not everything everybody wanted, and maybe there are things in it other people didn't want. But here's the thing. It's an act. There's going to be new governments. We have elections. What's the possibility of this being reversed in future governments in the U.S.?
Sure, there's always that possibility, but let me tell you what we did in this legislation. First of all, you have 10 years of certainty, 10 years of investment. So we didn't play games with the numbers, okay? We didn't say, this is going to be $500 billion, but we're only going to do it for 2 years. We might do parts of it for 10 years. This is a 10-year pathway, dual pathway. And we knew that we had to have buy-in from all segments of people making energy today that we depend on. So we need the oil companies, we need the gas companies, we need the coal companies, we need the pipelines, we need the investments, we need the transmission lines, we need permitting to build transmission. So if you're going to build transmission, you need to build pipe. If you're building pipe, you need to build pipes that will carry hydrogen. So if we're going to do that, then how are we able to use existing pipelines that can be re-sleeved or using the same pathways that we use in conventional as we convert? So we're looking at all of those. The thing I can tell you right now is there are people now looking at this, as you said, major energy companies, large energy companies, that have said, there's some opportunity here for us, and it has certainty built into it. They're going to have to step to the plate quick, okay? So here's the politics we're dealing with, Steve. If next week, November the 8th, let's put November the 8th, okay? Let's say that we lose the House, Democrats lose the House, Republicans are in the majority now, and majority, they take the Senate too. But you still have President Trump, and no matter who has what, they won't have veto proof. Biden. It won't be veto proof. So President Biden will be the point man. He'll be the spear catcher. And he'll have to stop some of the stuff that basically is there for good reason. The finances, they called inflation. Why'd you call it inflation reduction? I said, well, let's look. If you put more product in the market, don't you think the prices should balance or basically reduce? The more product, the more choices you have as consumers, it'll bring the price down. I said, next of all, also in that bill, that what we did is we basically allowed for the first time Medicare could negotiate for lower drug prices. We also put a $35 cap on insulin, life-saving insulin for Medicare, and we put $2,000 out of pocket. So that will kick in the next 2 years. All of the things we're talking about will really grab hold for the next 2 years. It's 2024 if, let's just say, the Republicans have the president's, executive branch, let's say they have the executive branch, they have the legislative branch, and they have both of them. all three, then that can be changed, yes. But that's why, and the people that I have been such a protector of the filibuster, which I know a lot of people have different ideas and different opinions. It is the only thing that keeps this democracy with three branches of equal government. Without the filibuster, then if you have a president of the same party that has control of the House and the Senate, so the executive and legislative branch are controlled by the same majority party, there's no checks and balances because simple majorities rule anything a strong president wants. And I watched this for 4 years with President Trump beating on the Republican senators. He said, you've got 54 votes, why not use them? And I'll give Mitch McConnell, a lot of times we don't agree on a lot, and sometimes we really go at it, but he basically held the line. And he protected that institutional, and I think it'll give us, trust me, what goes around comes around. And that's the only check and balance that we have on the executive branch. Without that, simple majority will rule. And if that's the case, then we ought to go to one branch of the House and the Senate. It should be unitary. It shouldn't be dual bicameral.
Well, Senator, time is up. I thank you again so much for willing to join us, to engage with us, to discuss your ideas and the path forward. Just wanted, in closing, to say that it's been a real privilege to be chatting with you and to expose you to the Stanford audience. So thank you so much.
Well, let me say this. If I may, Stephen, say thank you to your audience. It sounds like you have a wonderful audience, or either you have an applause meter, one of the two, and I appreciate both, whatever you may.
It's real.
Anyway, let me say this. I hope we gave him something to think about. I hope we did. I hope we gave you enough to think about, and there was a lot of thought process in what we have done. This is a great country. It's a wonderful nation. The whole world's depending on us. This piece of legislation, these two we've done, bipartisan infrastructure and the Inflation Reduction, it gives the world hope that America will still be the innovative and creators that's needed to save the planet as we have it.
One last story. I got to tell you, Shell is putting electrolyzers on islands in the North Sea on their wind farms. When the wind, if you have excess electricity and wind, they're going to make hydrogen. Then they're going to pipe it on shore. And so, again, there's substantial commercial investments for real now happening for the first time. Okay, thank you again, Senator.